The bride had just stepped onto the aisle when the groom walked away just because of her limp. The entire venue held its breath, their judgmental stares cutting through her like blades. But then, from the very last row, a powerful billionaire, uninvited, rose to his feet. He said nothing at first. He simply walked forward, lifted her into his arms, and turned to the groom with a voice like ice. "If you're too weak to hold her, then I will." And in that moment, the entire wedding collapsed into silence. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from and stay till the end, because in this story, the one they mocked becomes the one they all fear to lose. Elena had always walked with a grace that defied expectation, a soft, deliberate stride shaped by the hidden brace beneath her wedding gown. It wasn't the kind of disability that screamed for attention, but it whispered to those who looked too long, a childhood injury that left her with a subtle limp, yes, but also with a lifetime of quiet battles and unspoken insecurities. She had grown used to being measured not by who she was, but by what she wasn't. And yet, despite it all, she stood radiant that morning, her dark hair cascading over her shoulder, her eyes wide with hope and fear, her white gown hugging her like a promise she was finally daring to believe in. It shimmered in the light like a symbol of purity, not just in tradition but in intent. She wanted to believe this was her moment to shed the weight of judgment and step into something new. But deep inside, a storm of doubt was beginning to swirl. Daniel, the man waiting for her at the altar, had once been the dream, handsome, charming, and adored by his high society circle. He'd swept Elena off her feet with laughter and compliments that once made her feel whole. But lately, something had changed. His touch had grown colder, his compliments shorter, his eyes, distracted when they thought she wasn't looking. Raised among luxury and perfection, Daniel had been taught that love must always look good in photographs. And in a world full of flawless bodies and curated appearances, Elena's quiet strength no longer seemed to fit the narrative he wanted to sell. The setting of their wedding was every inch of fantasy, the garden estate blooming with white roses, the guests seated in perfect rows, their designer sunglasses shielding not just their eyes but their judgments. Every detail had been handpicked for elegance, every face in the crowd familiar with the pressure of reputation. But beneath the surface, the air was cold. The guests didn't smile for Elena. They watched her, assessed her. Some whispered behind manicured fingers. Others simply stared, curious how someone like her had gotten this far. Elena felt it all, the weight of their glances, the chill beneath her veil, the truth that no amount of white fabric could disguise. The arch ahead, adorned in roses, felt less like a gateway and more like a test. It stood tall and hollow, the symbolic door to a future she wasn't sure she was still welcome in. And as she moved toward it, one step at a time, something in her heart whispered what she dared not say aloud. "He's going to leave you here." The wind stilled as Elena reached the altar, the delicate arch of white roses now towering over her like an unblinking eye. Daniel stood just inches away, his jaw tense, his fingers fidgeting at his side. His smile had vanished. His eyes, once warm and inviting, now darted around the crowd as though searching for an escape route. Elena's heart pounded, not from nerves, but from a creeping realization that what she had feared for weeks was about to unfold in front of everyone. The officiant began, voice steady, asking them to join hands. Daniel didn't move. The silence deepened. Guests shifted in their chairs, a cough, a murmur, a creak of discomfort. Elena extended her trembling hand, hoping it would shake less if he just took it. He didn't. Instead, he stepped back. He began, swallowing hard. "I need a moment." The murmurs grew louder. Elena froze, her extended hand hanging midair before slowly falling to her side. Daniel turned toward the guests, eyes darting from one face to another, as if looking for justification. "It's just, everything's been moving so fast. The pressure, the attention. I don't know if I can do this right now." There was no mention of love, no apology, no courage to speak the truth that the closer the wedding came, the more Daniel's pride had recoiled from the thought of standing beside someone the world wouldn't call perfect. He wasn't rejecting Elena because he was overwhelmed. He was rejecting her because she limped. Her hands shook, Her lips parted, but no sound came. In the front row, her father looked down at the grass, his face unreadable. Friends who once cheered now looked away. A bridesmaid wiped a tear, but none stepped forward. Elena was alone, truly, heartbreakingly alone. Gasps whispered through the crowd like a passing wind. One woman even stood as if to leave, unwilling to witness the shame unraveling in real time. And that was when it happened. A slow movement from the back row, a chair scraped against the stone. All eyes turned. Lucian Blackwell stood. The air around him seemed to stiffen. Dark suit tailored like armor, face sculpted with years of battles. No one dared challenge. The name alone was enough to silence rooms. Lucian Blackwell, the man who had broken monopolies, bought governments, and buried empires beneath a single glare. He wasn't on any official guest list. Yet here he was, watching, waiting, unmoved by the opulence around him. He stepped forward, calm and deliberate, his gaze fixed not on Daniel, but on Elena. The crowd froze. The man who spoke in boardrooms and headlines now walked down an aisle of rose petals and gasping mouths, and no one dared stop him. No one knew why he was there. No one but Elena. Years ago, her mother, a respected physician, had saved Lucian's life during a medical emergency the world never knew about. He had promised then, quietly, that should her family ever need anything, he would be there. Elena never thought he meant it. Never even told anyone. But Lucian had never forgotten the woman who saw him not as a tycoon, but as a man, fragile and human. And now, as the daughter of that woman stood humiliated beneath rose-covered lies, Lucian kept his promise. He didn't walk. He arrived, with silence, presence, and purpose. And suddenly, everything shifted. Elena turned instinctively. Her breath caught in her throat as Lucian Blackwell stepped into the aisle, his polished shoes crushing white rose petals with the finality of a verdict. The murmurs of the crowd dissolved into stunned silence, broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She hadn't seen him in years, only once in her mother's hospital room, when she was still a girl too young to understand the weight of promises exchanged in hushed tones. Yet here he was, as imposing as a legend, moving through the garden like a storm dressed in silk and steel. Lucian didn't speak. Not at first. He walked past the stunned guests, past the officiant who instinctively stepped aside, and came to a stop before her. Elena's knees trembled, not from humiliation now, but from disbelief. Before she could find the words to ask why, he bent slightly, placed one arm behind her back and the other beneath her knees, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. A hush fell, so deep it felt sacred. Her veil fluttered gently over his arm. Her eyes met his, and in them, she saw not pity, but fire. Purpose. Daniel stumbled a step forward, confusion twisting across his face. What are you doing? Lucian didn't look at him. At first, he spoke only when the weight of the moment demanded it. His voice smooth, deep, and unforgiving. If you're too weak to hold her, he said, turning slowly toward Daniel, then I will. And not out of pity, but because I see the crown you missed while chasing glitter. Gasps echoed like wind between marble statues. Someone in the back dropped a champagne glass. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He tried again. You can't just. This isn't. Lucian's voice cut through him like frost. Yours to disgrace. Yours to abandon. After parading her in front of a crowd you trained to judge her. Daniel fell silent. Elena lay in Lucian's arms, stunned, but not powerless. Her fingers clutched his jacket, not to hold on, but to ground herself in the surreal gravity of the moment. Her shame, so sharp moments ago, melted beneath the steady rhythm of Lucian's breath. He wasn't rescuing her. He was restoring her. She trusted you, Lucian continued, his voice quieter now, but far more dangerous. She gave you a chance to love her as she is, not as she pretended to be. And you You made her doubt her worth in front of everyone. Lucian's gaze swept across the silent guests. Take a good look. You were invited to witness love. Instead, you became spectators to cowardice. But I will not let this woman walk away from this altar believing she was the failure. Elena's tears didn't fall from grief now, but from release. She had never wanted to be carried. Not literally, not symbolically, but in Lucian's arms, she felt neither small nor broken. She felt seen. They turned together, walking slowly back down the aisle, the same petals now crushed beneath Lucian's deliberate steps. The same walkway once meant for Daniel now transformed into something else entirely: redemption. Not just his, but hers. The symbol of everything she thought she'd lost now paved the path forward, and each step they took was a step away from shame and towards something truer. As they passed the final row of guests, Lucian paused. You don't get to define her, he said, without turning back. She'll do that herself now. And with that, they left behind the altar, the stunned whispers, and the man who couldn't see the treasure he was holding, while the one who could never took his eyes off her again. Long before Elena ever walked that aisle, Lucian Blackwell had already made a vow, once spoken in private, in a sterile hospital room where life and death danced on the edge of a heart monitor. Years ago, when Lucian was still a younger man, driven by power and isolation, he had collapsed on the tarmac of his private airstrip, heart failure, undiagnosed, sudden. The paramedics panicked. The junior doctors froze. But then came Dr. Isabella Hart, Elena's mother, calm, composed, brilliant. She made decisions faster than fear could take root, and in doing so, she saved his life. But it wasn't just the skill that stayed with him. It was her conviction. She didn't care who he was. She spoke to him like a man, not a billionaire. And after she stabilized him, she leaned down and whispered, if you ever meet my daughter one day and she needs someone, be that someone. It was the kind of thing you say in a moment, not expecting it to matter. But Lucian never forgot. He had kept his distance over the years, tracked Elena's path quietly, respectfully. Watched her grow from a girl full of promise into a woman full of quiet resilience. When her mother passed, he sent flowers anonymously. When Elena's name surfaced in society circles, connected to a fast-rising businessman named Daniel, Lucian paid attention, not to interfere, not unless he had to. And then he read the wedding announcement. A sense settled over him, unshakable. He wasn't sure why at first, but something in his gut told him he needed to be there. So he came. Sat in the very back row, uninvited, unnoticed, until the moment called him forward. What no one knew, not even Elena, was that Lucian had once loved someone like her. Years ago, a woman who moved with a quiet elegance, carried scars beneath beautiful skin. He had let fear win then. He had let whispers and reputation dictate his choices. And it haunted him. He hadn't just lost her. He had buried the part of himself that knew better. He swore never to let fear speak louder than truth again. So when he saw Elena standing alone at the altar, humiliated and trembling in white, he didn't hesitate. It wasn't pity that moved him. It was promise. It was memory. It was the vow he had once made to a dying woman who had saved his life. And the truth of a second chance he refused to let slip away. Now, as he held Elena in his arms and the guests slowly began to shift, something changed. The cold expressions cracked. One woman stood and quietly left, her heels clicking against stone like retreat. Another reached into her purse to dab at her eyes. A slow, soft applause broke the silence, not orchestrated, not forced, but genuine. The kind that acknowledges not just what had happened, but what it meant. Elena looked around, eyes wide, chest rising with a breath she hadn't let herself take in years. She'd spent so long trying to be chosen, by friends, by society, by love, that she hadn't realized she was worthy of being seen all along. Not as a project, not as a pity case, but as a woman, whole, brave, deserving. Lucian didn't speak as he carried her past the rows of faces that once looked through her. He didn't need to. In his silence, there was a vow stronger than any spoken that day, one her mother would have understood, one Elena would never forget. Lucian and Elena didn't rush into anything after that day. There were no tabloids filled with diamond rings or extravagant honeymoons. No whispered rumors about secret engagements or scandalous affairs. Instead, there was something far rarer: stillness. Patience. A quiet partnership built not on public approval, but on mutual respect. Lucian didn't try to sweep Elena into a life she hadn't chosen. He simply stayed, offering his presence, his protection, and most importantly, his belief in her, without ever once asking her to become anything but herself. Elena, for the first time in her life, didn't feel like she was trying to catch up with the world. Instead, she built her own. Over the course of the year that followed, she transformed what had once been shame into strength. She launched the second vow, a foundation for women living with disabilities, women who had been overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel like love was a prize reserved for the flawless. The name came from a quiet truth she had come to understand. Sometimes, the second vow, the one you make to yourself after others have failed you, is the one that changes everything. Lucian stood beside her at the foundation's opening ceremony. Not at the podium, not in the spotlight, just nearby, steady, proud, watching her speak with a voice clear and full of fire. His reputation, once cold and untouchable, began to soften in the eyes of the public, but not because he had lost power, because he had finally used it to lift someone else without condition. As for Daniel, he faded from view like a shadow at sunrise. His name was no longer spoken at gatherings or social events. If mentioned at all, it was only as a cautionary tale. Don't be the man who left a queen at the altar because he couldn't see past his own insecurity. He became a ghost of a lesson. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the wedding that never was, the estate opened its gates again. This time, there were no petals, no white tints, no altar dressed in roses. Just a simple path of stone through the garden where it all began. Elena walked that path alone, not because she had no one to lean on, but because she finally didn't need to. Her dress was soft gray this time, flowing and unbound, with no veil to hide behind. Her hair was loose, her smile effortless. Every step she took echoed with a different kind of power, not in being carried, but in standing fully in herself. Guests gathered not to witness a ceremony, but a celebration, a woman who had rewritten her own ending. Not by finding a savior, but by choosing not to shrink for anyone ever again. At the end of the path stood Lucian, not waiting to catch her, but simply waiting to walk beside her. And as she reached him, taking his hand, not as a rescue, but as an equal, Elena smiled with a kind of peace that only comes from walking through fire and finding your way out whole. She didn't need to be carried to feel chosen. She needed to be accepted as she was. And now, finally, she was. They saw a flaw. He saw a fire. And in lifting her, he raised them both. Elena's story wasn't about being rescued. It was about being recognized. In a world that often judges people for what makes them different, she stood tall in her truth, and someone finally saw the strength she'd carried all along. Not someone perfect, but someone powerful enough to match her courage. And because of that moment, because of a man who stepped forward when everyone else stepped back, she found the space to become everything she was meant to be. Not in spite of her differences, but because of them. Have you ever been rejected for something you can't change? What if your true strength was never meant to blend in, but to stand out just like hers? If this story touched you, share it with someone who's still waiting to be seen. And stay with us for more stories where love steps forward when the world steps back. Thanks for watching. Until next time, walk proud, speak louder, and never apologize for who you are.